I had been assigned to the Northwatch Cull station for 6 years by the time they brought her in, and in all that time I had never once disobeyed an order. That is not a boast. It is the plain truth of a man who kept his head down, filled out his forms, and told himself that the wasting scale was real enough, common enough, cruel enough, that culling was mercy dressed as duty. Northwatch sat at the far edge of the district, a long, low compound of split-rail fencing and tin-roofed sheds where the border patrols brought in anything too sick, too old, or too broken to carry on. The wasting scale takes a dragon slow. Their hide dulls first, then the joints seize, then the breath goes ragged, until there is nothing left to do but end it clean, quick, before the suffering stretches on for weeks. I had put down 11 dragons that spring alone, always at dawn, always with the same short line the warden office issued to men like me to read aloud before the bolt. For the herd, for the border, for the good of what remains. I said those words so many times they had stopped meaning anything at all. She came in on a hay cart on a Tuesday, hauled down from a ridge collapse 2 days' ride north. Her left wing hung wrong, folded back at an angle no healthy wing folds, and she dragged her hind leg like it belonged to someone else. The inspector who signed her intake slip barely looked at her before he marked the box. Wasting scale, suspected, cull by dawn. He was young and tired, and had 4 more stations to reach before dark, and I did not blame him for it. Not then, and not now. A man moving fast enough stops seeing what is in front of him. I did look at her. I always looked, because looking was the only part of the job that still felt like mine. Her eyes were clear. Wasting scale dulls the eyes first, before the hide even starts to go. I had seen it 11 times that spring, watched the light go flat and distant in a dying dragon's stare, and hers were bright and furious and frightened all at once. The eyes of something in pain, not something dying of rot. I knelt by the cart in the gray Northwatch morning and ran my hand along her ribs, feeling for the telltale softness under the scale, and she flinched but didn't snap at me, which told me more than the inspector's clipboard ever could. I told the night clerk I needed until dawn to confirm the diagnosis. It wasn't a lie, it also wasn't the whole truth, and I have never pretended otherwise. I splinted the wing myself, in the intake shed, by lantern light that I traded for daylight the moment the sun came up over the ridge and I could see well enough to work. Her leg wasn't broken, just wrenched hard enough to swell, and I bound it the way I'd bind a plow horse's leg, because a dragon's tendons, it turns out, are not so different from a horse's when you get down to the meat of it. She screamed once, low and awful, when I set the wing joint back into its socket, a sound that went through the tin roof and out across the empty yard. Then she went still and let me finish, watching me the whole time with those clear, furious eyes, like she was deciding whether I was worth the trust she was about to spend on me. I named her sorrel because it was the only word that came to me, some half-remembered herb from my mother's garden, and because a thing in that much pain deserved a name that wasn't a case number on an intake slip. For 6 days, I told the warden office the diagnosis was pending. For 6 days, I fed her from my own ration and changed her dressings twice a day and slept on a cot in the intake shed, so I'd hear if her breathing changed for the worse. It never did. By the 4th day she was standing, unsteady, but standing, testing her weight on the bad leg, an inch at a time, like she didn't quite believe it would hold. By the 6th she'd taken to resting her head against my shoulder while I worked, a weight I felt long after she lifted it away, and I found myself talking to her the way I hadn't talked to anything living in years, not reciting warden office lines, just talk, the ordinary kind, about the weather and the fence that needed mending and nothing at all. There were nights in that stretch I lay awake certain the inspector would come back, or worse, that someone above him would ask why a diagnosis was still pending on the 7th day, when every other case that spring had been closed by the 2nd. I had 11 dead dragons behind me, and a career built on never once making the warden office ask that question twice. I asked myself more than once what exactly I thought I was doing. keeping a suspected case alive off the books in a shed with my name on the door. I never had a good answer. I kept feeding her anyway. On the 7th morning, the ridge above the station was full of dragons. They didn't come screaming. They came the way weather comes. Quiet, total, filling the whole gray sky until there was nothing else to look at. I counted 30 before I stopped counting. Wings folded tight against the wind, dropping in slow spirals toward the ridgeline like the whole sky had decided to sit down. At the front of them, moving like something that had never once needed to hurry in its life, was an ancient dragon, the color of old iron, scarred along one flank in a pattern I would later learn every soul on that ridge knew by heart, the mark of the Wind Hollow Reach's warden matriarch. I stood in the shed doorway with a bucket of water in one hand and no idea what to do with the other, and I watched Sorrel drag herself past me on her still healing leg, out into the yard, calling up toward the ridge in a voice I had not heard her use before, younger, thinner, a hatchling's voice under all that pain, cracking on the second note. The warden matriarch came down alone, the rest of them holding the ridgeline like a wall of iron and hide. She did not look at me the way I expected to be looked at, as an intruder on something ancient and none of my business. She looked at me the way you look at a fence you didn't know was holding up your whole barn. Sorrel had fallen from that ridge chasing a hawk 2 days before the hay cart found her, the matriarch told me, in a voice that moved the gravel under my boots, and had been given up for dead by her own kin before a border patrol found her half buried in scree and shipped her south as cull stock. One broken thing among many, no different on paper from a horse gone lame. She was not diseased. She had never been diseased. She was, the matriarch said, watching Sorrel lean her healing wing against my arm, like she still didn't quite trust it to hold her weight alone. Someone's daughter, and she had been marked for a dawn execution over a mistake made by a tired man, with 4 stations left to reach, and a form that had no box for injured, only for dying. I did not kneel. Nobody asked me to, and I would not have known how, 6 years into a job that had taught me mostly how to fill out forms and read a bad diagnosis aloud. What the matriarch did instead was simpler than that, and it has stayed with me longer than any of it, longer than the ridge full of dragons, longer than the cull orders I never filed. She lowered her great scarred head to the level of mine, so that for one long moment we were eye to eye, a district vet, and something that had outlived 6 generations of warden offices, and she said the only thing that needed saying, that Sorrel would fly home on her own 2 wings, because a man who still looked, really looked, before he signed a form, was rarer in this world than any dragon standing behind him. They left before the warden office ever sent a man to ask why my report was 6 days late. I never told them the real reason. I filed the diagnosis as an intake error, which was true enough as far as it went, and I kept the small carved stone Sorrel left curled in the straw of the intake shed the morning she flew. Not a payment, I think, but a thing to remember her by, the way you keep a photograph of someone who mattered, and never quite explain why. I still work the Northwatch line. I still look, every single time, before I sign anything, and I have caught 2 more mistakes since, quietly, off the record, the way a man learns to when he's been shown once what a form can cost. It has earned me nothing but a slower morning and a clean conscience, and I have decided, 6 years into a job I used to think had nothing left to teach me, that this is the better trade by far.